Okay, so get this right. There's this case in Australia, Perth, and it's really disturbing. They found this teenager, and she was so malnourished, they described her as skeletal. But here's the thing, she was living with both parents. The parents were actually recently sentenced, so we've got all these news reports from the trial,
Mhm.
and they cover all the details. But, we want to go deeper. Like, what does this say about being a parent and neglect, and how the choices you make as a family can really impact a child?
I think what really gets me about this case is, like, how can parents, people who are supposed to care for their child,
Yeah.
how can they do something like this? It makes you wonder, right? Like, where do your personal beliefs end and the well-being of a child begins?
Yeah, it's that line, isn't it?
It's a blurry line.
And that's what we're going to try to figure out today. So let's start with the daughter, okay?
Okay.
So when she was hospitalized, she was 17.
17.
But get this, she weighed 27.3 kilograms.
Hmm.
That's like about 60 pounds.
That's tiny.
I know. And to give you some perspective, that's about the average weight of a 9-year-old.
Wow, that's hard to comprehend.
It is. The doctors were obviously super concerned and said she needed to be hospitalized, like, right away.
It's not just the weight, though, right? Like, the reports say she was really underdeveloped for her age, too. Like, hadn't even started menstruating yet.
Yeah.
And they diagnosed her with, what was it? Grade 4 malnutrition.
Yeah.
And that's the most severe level, right? Like,
Yeah.
her body wasn't getting what it needed to function at all. This wasn't just picky eating. It was like life or death.
And it's tough to understand how a teenager living with both parents could get that bad. I mean, the news report said that the parents tried to downplay how serious it was. They said she was just naturally slender and was a premature baby.
And there's more. They even resisted the hospital treatment. Like, they wanted to control every single thing about her care, even small stuff like brushing her teeth. Yeah, imagine that. Your teenage daughter in the hospital, and you're supervising her bathroom breaks. It makes you wonder, like, how they were seeing the whole situation, you know?
It's so strange, isn't it? And on top of all that, the father, he even faked her birth certificate. Like, he was trying to trick the authorities about her real age and how healthy she was.
It's like, what were they trying to hide? Were they trying to, like, manipulate the system? Or was it something deeper? Like, they just couldn't accept how bad her condition was.
It does seem like they were living in their own little world where their daughter being so unwell was somehow, like, normal.
You said it, a constructed reality. It wasn't just like a lack of awareness. It seems like they were deliberately trying to make things fit their beliefs, even when the evidence was right there in front of them.
And part of this reality they built was keeping her isolated, right?
Yeah.
Homeschooling her and having her on this very strict vegan diet. And just to be clear, we're not saying anything's wrong with the vegan diet in itself.
No, not at all.
But in this case, it seems like they weren't managing it properly, like making sure she got all the nutrients a growing teenager needs.
Yeah, this isn't about veganism itself. It's about understanding that any dietary restriction, especially for a kid, you have to be really careful. You have to plan it out, make sure they're getting everything they need.
Exactly. What's really concerning is that there were these like red flags. People saw what was happening. Like there was a ballet teacher. She was worried about how much the daughter weighed, and she even brought it up to the mother. I mean, can you imagine this girl's dancing for hours every week, clearly underweight, and it didn't even set off alarm bells?
And it wasn't just her, right? The report said other parents and other dance teachers, they also filed complaints. They were worried too, and they told the Department of Communities. And these weren't doctors or anything, just regular people who saw that something wasn't right.
So it wasn't like nobody noticed. People were concerned, but the parents just ignored them or brushed it off.
It really shows how neglect can be hidden in plain sight. Even when you have multiple people saying, hey, something's wrong, it makes you think, like, how hard is it to actually intervene in a family situation, especially when the parents are so resistant?
It's a tough one. And in 2020, Child Protection Services, they even started an investigation. But the parents, they tried to block it at every turn. They kept lying about the daughter's age and her health. It seemed like they were more worried about getting in trouble than they were about making sure their daughter was okay.
It's a chilling example, of how hard it can be to protect children when their own parents are working against you. It makes you wonder how we can make the system better, how to protect vulnerable kids in these situations.
It's a big question, and it gets even worse. The doctor who saw the daughter was so worried that she immediately referred her to the hospital, but the parents, they refused to take her at first.
No way.
They only agreed when they were told that the child protection investigation would keep going if they didn't. It's like they were more worried about the investigation than about their daughter's health.
Yeah, it's not a good look. It really shows where their priorities were.
And the physical neglect is bad enough, right? But then you have to think about the psychological impact, the emotional toll this must have taken on her.
You're right, this goes way beyond the physical stuff. We're talking about her emotional development, her social skills. Imagine being 17 and still watching Teletubbies.
Yeah.
Or getting a Barbie doll for your birthday. It just shows how limited her world was, how controlled.
It's like her childhood was taken from her. And what really gets me, during the trial, she wrote this letter to the court begging them to go easy on her parents.
Wow.
Yeah, and she said she was afraid of being homeless if they went to jail. She even took the blame, apologized for causing them trouble.
That's heartbreaking.
Imagine that, a child feeling like it's her fault that her parents are in trouble, even though they're the ones who hurt her. It really makes you think about what was going on in that family, the dynamics, maybe even manipulation. These cases are so complicated.
They really are. It's hard to separate the love, the loyalty, from the potential manipulation that could be going on.
It's just so sad. And even with all the evidence, the parents still denied doing anything wrong during the trial. They just kept saying they did nothing wrong.
Wow. And the judge, Judge Black, she didn't hold back, did she? She called them out on their willful blindness, their lack of remorse.
Yeah.
She even said, and I'm quoting here, "I simply do not and cannot accept that the two of you needed someone to point out to you that your daughter was starving, that she was fading away."
That's powerful. You can really hear the frustration, the anger in her words. How could they not see what was happening to their own child?
It's the question that hangs over this whole case, isn't it? Was it just cruelty? Or was it something else, like some deep-seated belief that blinded them to their daughter's suffering?
It's hard to know for sure, and that's what's so unsettling about it. It really makes you think about parental responsibility, doesn't it? Like, where's the line? How far can your personal beliefs go, especially when it comes to your kids? It's a tough one. And it makes you think about, like, how we even define neglect. It's not always as obvious as, physical abuse or not giving a child food.
Exactly. Like, in this case, it's more about the stuff you don't see right away. The emotional neglect, the way she was kept from developing, socially. Imagine you're 17, but you haven't grown properly. You're watching shows for toddlers. You've never really hung out with other teenagers. That's a kind of deprivation, too.
It's like this hidden form of abuse. You might not see bruises, but the damage is still there.
Exactly. And often, like we see here, it's all tied up with the parents' own beliefs. They really thought they were doing what was best, even when they were limiting her diet, who she could see, her whole world, really.
It makes you wonder, like, how much of it was really about protecting her and how much was about them needing to control everything. Like, were they putting their own fears onto her? Were they so stuck in their own way of seeing things that they just couldn't see the harm they were causing?
It's worth thinking about, for sure. If we can figure out what drives people to do this, maybe we can prevent it from happening again. Like, what are the warning signs? The things that tell us a child might be in danger so we can step in before it's too late.
So we've talked about the neglect, the impact on the daughter, what might have been going on with the parents, but let's get back to the medical stuff for a minute.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a teenager who was a little underweight. The doctor said she looked like a skeleton.
The medical reports are pretty grim. It's clear her body was shutting down. She was way too small for her age, hadn't developed the way she should, and she was basically starving.
And she'd never even had a period.
Nope. She was old enough, but her body just couldn't do it. That's how bad the malnutrition was. Think about that. Her body was so deprived, it couldn't even do the most basic things.
And remember, she was a dancer. Dancing, like 8 hours a week sometimes. How can someone be that active and that malnourished?
It just shows how much they were hiding it. The parents told the doctors she was eating great, getting stronger. They even said she was just naturally thin and had been born premature. Like, that explains everything.
It's like they made up this whole story to make themselves feel better instead of facing reality.
Denial can be powerful, especially when you're trying to defend what you believe in, the choices you make. It seems like they couldn't or wouldn't accept that they might be wrong.
But the proof was right there. When she was finally in the hospital, the doctor said it was grade 4 malnutrition, the worst kind.
And they had to put her on a feeding tube right away, the kind that goes through your nose and down into your stomach.
That sounds really uncomfortable.
It is, but it was the only way to get nutrients into her system fast enough. It shows how serious it was.
So they had her on the feeding tube for 5 days, and then they started her on a special meal plan so she could gain weight and get stronger.
And it worked. In just 50 days, she gained 7 kilograms, that's over 15 pounds, and grew 3.5 centimeters taller. It shows you how amazing the human body is. how it can bounce back if you give it what it needs.
Like her body was just waiting for a chance to catch up, to grow the way it was supposed to all along.
That's a good way to put it. It shows how resilient we are. But it also makes you wonder, what about the doctors? Could they have done something sooner?
Yeah, did any other doctors see her over the years and maybe notice something was wrong?
It's possible. And that's why it's so important for doctors and nurses to know the signs, to ask the right questions, and to really follow up, make sure everything's okay.
We always think of neglect as something that happens in families that are struggling with money or maybe addiction, but this case shows it can happen anywhere. It could be your neighbor, the family down the street.
It's about looking closer, realizing that neglect can look different in different families. It's not always the same. And being willing to see past what people want you to see and ask if something's wrong.
So what can we do if we think something like this is happening? I mean, it feels weird to get involved, right? Like it's not our business, but do we have a responsibility to do something?
It's a tough call. It's not easy. But sometimes speaking up can save a child's life. And you don't always have to be confrontational. Sometimes just being kind, listening, offering help, that can make a huge difference.
It's about building a community where kids feel safe, where they know they can ask for help if they need it. It's about paying attention, being caring, and stepping in when you see something that's not right.
That's it. This case is a reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect kids. It's about making sure every child is safe, cared for, and has the chance to really thrive.
No, that's something I can get behind. This case has been really hard to hear about, but it's also been eye-opening. It's shown us how complex neglect is, how hard it can be to intervene, and how important it is to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. So we've talked about all the emotional, ethical stuff in this case, but now let's get into the legal side of things. The parents, they were charged with reckless neglect, right? And the dad also admitted to faking the birth certificate. But what did they actually argue in court?
So the prosecution, they really hammered home how serious and how long this neglect went on for. They basically said the parents knew their daughter was getting worse, but just didn't care. They put their own beliefs first. They brought up all the times the parents ignored warnings, lied to officials, and even stopped people from helping their daughter. It's a pretty strong case, showing this wasn't just a mistake, it was intentional.
And what about the defense? What was their angle?
Their whole thing was that the parents truly believed they were doing what was best for their daughter. They were convinced that their vegan diet and homeschooling, that was the right way to raise her. They said they thought they were giving her a good life. They were basically trying to say it was all a big misunderstanding, not that they meant to hurt her.
So kind of a clash of worldviews then. On one side, you have the parents saying it's their right to raise their kid how they want. And on the other, you have society saying, hold on, we have to protect kids even from their own parents if they're being harmed. How did the court decide with all that going on?
Tough one, right? It really shows how messy these situations can be. In the end, the court sided with the prosecution. They said, yeah, parents have rights, but those rights don't mean you can neglect your kid's basic needs. It's a reminder that there are limits, especially when a child's safety is at stake.
And the sentences were pretty hefty, 6.5 years for the father and 5 for the mother. What did the judge consider when she decided on those sentences?
Judge Black, she was very specific about why she chose those sentences. She talked about how bad the daughter's condition was, how long it had been going on, and how the parents showed absolutely no remorse. Plus, they had actively lied to authorities and blocked any attempts to help their daughter. It wasn't just carelessness, it was like a whole pattern of deception and putting the child last. She wanted to make it crystal clear that this kind of behavior has serious consequences.
Didn't she give them a real dressing down when she announced the sentence?
Oh, yeah. She called them willfully blind, said they were trying to hide the truth, and even said their actions created a child who couldn't function as an adult. You could tell she was really disappointed in them, frustrated even. It seemed like she thought they were so stuck in their own ways that they just couldn't see the damage they were doing.
It's hard to imagine being that out of touch, isn't it? But I keep thinking about the daughter's letter, where she asked the judge to be lenient with her parents. How does that fit with everything else, with the parents' actions, and how strongly the judge felt about it?
It's tough, right? That letter, it reminds us that families are complicated, and that the bond between a parent and child is strong. This young woman, after everything she went through, she still loves her parents and doesn't want to lose them. It shows the deep psychological impact of what happened and how she might have been manipulated. It's just sad to think she felt it was her fault
Mhm.
and that she had to stand up for them. It really underscores the lasting effects of this type of abuse.
It's a case full of twists and turns, that's for sure. It leaves you with more questions than answers. But as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the big things you hope our listeners take away from this?
Well, the first thing is child neglect is a serious problem, and it can have devastating lifelong effects. It's not always easy to spot, and it can happen in any family, rich or poor, it doesn't matter. We need to be aware of the signs, question what we see, and be ready to act if something feels wrong.
Right. The sooner we can step in, the better. And it's up to all of us to do our part.
And the second thing is, being a parent doesn't give you unlimited power. Society has to protect kids, even if it means going against their own parents. It's a balancing act, but at the end of the day, the child's safety has to come first.
Which leads us to the third takeaway. We all have a role to play in preventing this from happening. We need to be aware, be willing to speak up, and work together to create a support system for kids and families.
Exactly. This case shows us that we can't just stand by and do nothing. We need to advocate for kids, be their voice when they can't speak for themselves. It's about making a world where every child feels seen, heard, and safe.
This deep dive has been heavy, but it's been so important to talk about. It's made us think about neglect, about what happens in families, and about how far personal beliefs can go when a child's life is at stake.
It's definitely been a reminder to stay alert, to ask questions, and to be there for kids who need help. It's a call to create a world where every child has the chance to truly thrive.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's giving you a lot to think about and that you'll join us in making the world a safer place for children. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going.